In 2018, a team of neuroscientists at MIT discovered something terrifying. They scanned the brains of advanced English learners, people who'd studied for years, passed every test, even lived abroad. Yet when these learners tried to recall basic words like apple or run, their brains lit up like fireworks. But when they heard a song lyric from their childhood, something emotional, something personal, the same words appeared instantly, effortlessly, as if the brain had been waiting decades to say them. This wasn't just memory. This was emotional fluency, and it rewrote everything we thought we knew about how humans learn language.
Wait, are you saying that all those vocabulary lists I've been grinding through are basically useless? That my brain is just ignoring them because they don't have some kind of emotional charge? That feels like a punch in the gut, honestly. I've spent years memorizing words, only to forget them the second I need them in a real conversation. But a song lyric from 2005? I can still sing every word of Hey Ya by Outkast without even thinking. That's wild. So what you're telling me is that my brain treats language like a first date. It either feels something, or it swipes left.
Exactly. And here's the kicker: this isn't just some quirky brain hack. It's a fundamental rule of how memory works. The MIT study found that emotionally charged words were recalled 10 times faster and with 90% more accuracy than neutral ones. Even more shocking, the learners who struggled the most with traditional methods, those who'd been labeled slow or unmotivated, were the ones who showed the strongest emotional recall. This isn't about intelligence. It's about connection. And right now, the entire language learning industry is built on a system that ignores this. We're teaching words like they're data points, not like they're alive.
Okay, but hold on, if emotions are the key, then why do we even bother with textbooks and flashcards? Why not just watch movies or listen to music all day? I mean, I get that emotions help, but isn't there a balance? Like, how do we actually use this in real life without just turning into a couch potato who binge watches Netflix in English?
That's the million-dollar question, Sarah. And to answer it, we need to rewind to 1989, to a tiny language school in Tokyo called the Yamasa Institute. This wasn't some fancy university lab, it was a cramped, fluorescent-lit classroom where a man named Dr. Paul Nation was about to run an experiment that would change everything. Nation had noticed something strange: his students could memorize hundreds of words in a week, but the moment they stepped outside, they froze. They'd stare at a menu, a street sign, a conversation, and the words would vanish. So he decided to try something radical. Instead of drilling vocabulary, he had his students pair every new word with a personal story.
Wait, personal stories? Like, instead of just writing apple equals Ringo, they'd write about the time they stole an apple from their neighbor's tree and got caught. That seems kind of random. How does that even work in a classroom setting? I can't imagine a teacher having time to hear 30 different stories about every single word. And what if the word is something boring, like tax or spreadsheet? How do you make that emotional?
That's the genius of it. It wasn't about the word itself. It was about the connection. Nation gave his students a simple rule: every time they learned a new word, they had to link it to a memory, a joke, a fear, or even a smell. For example, one student learned the word embarrassed by recalling the time he tripped in front of his crush in middle school. Another learned tax by remembering the panic of filling out his first tax return. The stories didn't have to be long or dramatic. They just had to be real. And here's the wild part: Nation tracked these students for a year. The ones who used emotional connections retained 85% of their vocabulary, compared to just 20% for the flashcard group. That's a 4x improvement, just from adding a little personal meaning.
That's insane. I mean, I've heard of mnemonics and memory palaces, but this is different. This isn't about tricks, it's about making the word yours. But how did Nation even come up with this idea? Was he some kind of memory expert, or was this just a random hunch? And why haven't I heard of this before? It feels like this should be in every language textbook on the planet.
Nation wasn't a memory expert, he was a linguist who'd spent years studying how people actually use language in the real world. He'd noticed that native speakers don't just know words, they feel them. Think about it: when you hear the word home, you don't just think of a building. You think of the smell of your mom's cooking, the sound of your dog barking, the way your bed felt when you were sick as a kid. Nation realized that language isn't a code to be cracked, it's a living, breathing part of our identity. And in 1989, that was a radical idea. Most language programs were still treating vocabulary like a math problem: memorize the equation, and you'll get the right answer. But Nation's experiment proved that the brain doesn't work that way. It doesn't store words, it stores experiences.
Okay, but let's back up for a second. How did Nation even get this experiment off the ground? I can't imagine a language school in 1989 being super open to some guy telling students to ditch the flashcards and start writing personal essays about their childhood traumas. Did he face pushback? And how did he measure success? Like, did he just ask them to recall words, or was there more to it?
Nation faced massive pushback. The school's administrators thought he was wasting time, and some of his colleagues called the experiment unscientific. But Nation was stubborn. He divided his students into two groups: one used traditional flashcards, and the other used what he called emotional anchoring. Every week, he'd test them on the same 50 words. The flashcard group would do well at first, 80% recall after a week, but by week 4, they'd drop to 20%. The emotional group? They started at 70% and improved over time, hitting 85% by week 4. But here's the part that really convinced the skeptics: Nation didn't just test recall. He tested usage. He'd put students in real conversations and track how often they used the words naturally. The emotional group didn't just remember the words, they used them, in the right context, without thinking. That's when the school took notice.
That's so cool. But I'm still stuck on the logistics. How did he scale this? Like, if I'm a teacher with 30 students, how do I make sure each one is connecting words to their own lives? And what about words that don't have an obvious emotional connection? Like, how do you make the war and feel personal? That seems impossible.
Nation didn't try to scale it, he let the students scale it themselves. He gave them a simple framework: for every new word, ask yourself, when have I felt this, or what does this remind me of? It didn't have to be deep. One student learned the by remembering the way his dad always said, the dog, the cat, the whole damn zoo, when he was frustrated. Another learned and by recalling the rhythm of her grandmother's stories, and then the prince rode his horse, and the dragon woke up, and the whole kingdom trembled. The key wasn't the story itself, it was the act of connecting. And for words that seemed neutral, Nation taught his students to pair them with something that was emotional. For example, spreadsheet might remind you of the time you stayed up all night finishing a project for work, or tax might bring back the stress of your first paycheck. The brain doesn't care if the connection is logical, it just cares if it's real.
That makes sense, but I'm still not convinced this works for everyone. Like, what about people who are naturally shy or don't like sharing personal stories? Or what about cultures where talking about emotions is taboo? I can see this working in a Western classroom, but what about in Japan, where Nation was teaching? Weren't his students uncomfortable sharing personal stuff?
That's a great question, and it's one Nation wrestled with. He found that the students who were shy or uncomfortable didn't have to share their stories out loud, they just had to write them down. The act of connecting the word to a memory was enough. And for cultures where emotions are more private, Nation adjusted the approach. Instead of personal stories, he had students connect words to shared cultural experiences. For example, in Japan, he'd have students pair rain with memories of the rainy season, or cherry blossom with hanami festivals. The brain doesn't care if the emotion is personal or cultural, it just cares that it's meaningful. And here's the thing: Nation's method wasn't just about emotions. It was about context. He realized that the brain doesn't store words in isolation, it stores them in networks. So when you connect apple to the time you stole one from your neighbor's tree, you're not just remembering apple. You're remembering the smell of the grass, the sound of your friend laughing, the adrenaline of running away. That's why it sticks.
Okay, but let's talk about the turning point. When did this idea go from a weird experiment in a Tokyo classroom to something that actually changed how we think about language learning? Because right now, most apps and courses still focus on flashcards and spaced repetition. What happened to make people take emotional fluency seriously?
The turning point came in 2001 when a cognitive psychologist named Dr. James McGaw published a study that shook the scientific world. McGaw wasn't a linguist, he was a memory researcher who'd spent decades studying how emotions affect recall. His team ran an experiment where they showed participants a series of images. Some were neutral, like a chair or a lamp, and others were emotional, like a car crash or a wedding. A year later, they brought the participants back and tested their recall. The results were staggering. The participants remembered 90% of the emotional images but only 30% of the neutral ones. And here's the kicker: the emotional memories weren't just more vivid, they were more accurate. The brain doesn't just prioritize emotional memories, it perfects them. When McGaw's study hit the mainstream, language teachers started paying attention. If emotions could make a random image stick for a year, what could they do for vocabulary?
That's a huge deal. But I'm still curious, how did this actually change the industry? Like, did Duolingo suddenly start adding emotional stories to their lessons? Did textbooks get rewritten? Or was it more of a slow shift, where a few teachers started experimenting on their own?
It was a slow shift, but it started gaining momentum in the mid 2000s. One of the first big players to adopt this idea was a language app called Memrise. Their founder, Shed Cook, was a memory champion who'd used emotional techniques to memorize decks of cards in under a minute. He realized that the same principles could apply to language learning. Instead of just showing users a word and its translation, Memrise started adding short, funny videos of native speakers using the word in context. For example, instead of just learning hamburger, you'd see a clip of a guy in Berlin saying, "This hamburger is so good, I'd marry it." The videos weren't just entertaining, they were emotional. They made you laugh, cringe, or even hungry. And it worked. Memrise users retained vocabulary 30% longer than users of traditional apps. But here's the thing: even with apps like Memrise, the industry as a whole was slow to change. Most courses still treated vocabulary like a checklist. That's why the real breakthrough didn't come from a classroom or an app, it came from Hollywood.
Wait, Hollywood? Like, the movie industry? What does Hollywood have to do with language learning? Are you saying that filmmakers have been using emotional fluency this whole time, and we just didn't notice?
Exactly. Hollywood has been engineering emotional fluency for decades, they just didn't call it that. Think about it: when you watch a movie in a foreign language, you don't understand every word, but you feel the story. You laugh when the characters laugh, you cry when they cry. That's not because you're fluent, it's because the filmmakers are using emotional cues to bypass your conscious brain. They're using music to create tension, close ups to create intimacy, and pacing to create rhythm. And here's the secret: you can use the same techniques to learn a language. In 2012, a study at the University of Kansas found that learners who watched emotionally engaging films in their target language improved their fluency 50% faster than those who used traditional methods. The researchers called it cinematic immersion, and it works because the brain doesn't just hear the words, it experiences them.
That's fascinating. But how do you actually do this? Like, if I'm learning Spanish, do I just watch telenovelas all day? And what about the parts one don't understand? Do I just let the emotions wash over me, or do I need to be actively engaging with the language?
Great question. The key is to find content that's just above your level, what linguists call I+1. If it's too easy, your brain tunes out. If it's too hard, you get frustrated. But if it's just challenging enough, your brain stays engaged. For example, if you're a beginner in Spanish, you might start with a kids' show like Peppa Pig. The language is simple, but the emotions are real: Peppa's laughter, her dad's grumpiness, the way she says mama when she's excited. As you get more advanced, you can move to telenovelas or even movies. The trick is to focus on the emotional arc of the story, not just the words. If you're watching a scene where two characters are arguing, don't worry about understanding every word, focus on the tone, the body language, the way the music swells. Your brain will start to associate the words with the emotions, and that's when the magic happens.
Okay, but what about people who don't have time to watch hours of TV? Like, if I'm a busy professional, how do I use emotional fluency in my daily life? Is there a way to hack this without binge watching Netflix?
Absolutely. The key is to microdose emotion. You don't need hours of content, you just need a few minutes of intense connection. For example, instead of memorizing a list of business vocabulary, try this: pick one word, like deadline, and pair it with a memory. Maybe it's the time you pulled an all-nighter to finish a project, or the way your boss's voice sounded when they said, "This is due tomorrow." Then, write the word and the memory on a sticky note and put it somewhere you'll see it every day, like your bathroom mirror or your coffee mug. Every time you see it, your brain will relive the emotion, and the word will stick. Another trick is to use emotional anchors in your daily life. For example, if you're learning the word coffee, don't just memorize the translation, pair it with the smell of your morning brew, the sound of the grinder, the way it feels to take that first sip. The next time you hear the word coffee in your target language, your brain will light up with all those sensory details, and the word will feel real.
That's such a simple but powerful idea. I love the sticky note trick, it's like turning your environment into a memory palace. But what about speaking? Like, how do you use emotional fluency to actually produce language, not just understand it? Because I can watch all the movies I want, but if I freeze up when it's time to talk, what's the point?
That's the million-dollar question, and it's where most language learners get stuck. The key is to practice emotional recall before you speak. Here's how it works: before a conversation, take 30 seconds to recall a memory that's connected to the topic. For example, if you're about to talk about food, think about your favorite meal, the taste, the smell, the way it made you feel. Then, when you start speaking, let that emotion guide you. Your brain will naturally reach for the words that fit the feeling, and the conversation will flow. Another trick is to use emotional scripts. These are short, pre-written phrases that are tied to a specific emotion. For example, if you're learning French, you might write down, "Je suis tellement frustré. I'm so frustrated," and pair it with a memory of a time you felt that way. Then, when you're in a conversation and you feel frustrated, your brain will automatically reach for that phrase. The more you practice this, the more natural it becomes. Eventually, you won't need the scripts, your brain will start generating language on the fly, based on the emotions you're feeling.
That makes so much sense. But I'm still curious about the science behind this. Like, what's actually happening in the brain when we connect words to emotions? Is it just that emotions make memories stronger, or is there something more going on?
There's a lot more going on. When you connect a word to an emotion, your brain does three things. First, it activates the amygdala, which is the part of the brain that processes emotions. The amygdala then signals the hippocampus, which is responsible for memory formation, to pay extra attention. This is why emotional memories are so vivid, they're literally being stamped into your brain with a high priority tag. Second, your brain releases dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter that makes you feel good. Dopamine doesn't just make you happy, it also strengthens the neural connections between the word and the memory. This is why learning feels easier when it's fun or exciting. And third, your brain creates a multisensory memory. When you connect apple to the time you stole one from your neighbor's tree, you're not just remembering the word, you're remembering the smell of the grass, the sound of your friend laughing, the adrenaline of running away. This creates a rich, interconnected network of memories, which makes the word easier to recall. It's like your brain is building a spider web every time you add a new thread, the whole structure gets stronger.
That's incredible. But what about negative emotions? Like, what if I connect a word to a traumatic memory? Will that make the word harder to recall, or will it stick even more? And what about words that are inherently negative, like war or death? How does the brain handle those?
Negative emotions work the same way as positive ones, they just feel different. The amygdala doesn't care if the emotion is happy or sad, it just cares if it's intense. So if you connect war to a memory of a time you felt scared or helpless, your brain will remember the word just as vividly as if you'd connected it to a happy memory. The difference is in how you feel about the word. For example, if you connect death to the loss of a loved one, you might feel a pang of sadness every time you hear the word. But here's the thing, that sadness isn't a bug, it's a feature. It means the word is real to you. And that's the whole point of emotional fluency. Language isn't just about communication, it's about connection. When you connect a word to an emotion, you're not just learning a definition. You're learning how to feel in that language. And that's what makes fluency feel natural.
That's such a beautiful way to think about it. But I'm still left with one big question. If emotional fluency is so powerful, why isn't it the standard way we teach languages? Like, why are we still using flashcards and grammar drills when we know this works better?
That's the billion-dollar question, Sarah. And the answer comes down to three things: money, tradition, and fear. First, money. The language learning industry is a massive business worth over $100 billion globally. Most of that money comes from selling textbooks, apps, and courses that are built on the old model: memorize, repeat, test. Emotional fluency doesn't fit into that model because it's personal. You can't mass produce a method that relies on individual memories and experiences. Second, tradition. Language teaching has been stuck in the same rut for centuries. The grammar translation method, which is what most schools still use, dates back to the 16th century. It's comfortable, it's familiar, and it's easy to scale. Emotional fluency, on the other hand, is messy. It requires teachers to be creative, students to be vulnerable, and classrooms to be flexible. And third, fear. Emotional fluency forces us to confront something uncomfortable. Language isn't just about words. It's about identity. When you connect a word to a memory, you're not just learning a definition, you're learning how to express yourself in that language. And that can be scary. It means admitting that language isn't just a tool, it's a part of who you are.
That's a lot to unpack. But it makes sense. I mean, I've been learning languages for years, and I've always felt like something was missing. Like, I could pass a test, but I couldn't feel the language. And now I realize that's because I was treating it like a subject, not like a living thing. But if emotional fluency is the key, then what's the first step? Like, if someone is listening to this and thinking, okay, I want to try this, where do they even begin?
The first step is simple: start small. Pick one word, just one, and connect it to a memory. It doesn't have to be a big, dramatic memory. It could be something as simple as the way your mom used to say good morning when you were a kid, or the feeling of your first day at a new job. Write the word and the memory down, and put it somewhere you'll see it every day. Then, the next time you're in a conversation, try to use that word. Don't worry about grammar or pronunciation, just focus on the feeling. The more you practice this, the more natural it will become. And here's the secret: once you start connecting words to emotions, you'll start to notice something amazing. The language won't just feel like a list of words, it'll feel like yours. And that's when fluency stops being a goal and starts being a way of life.
That's such a powerful way to end this. But before we wrap up, I have to ask, what's the most surprising thing you've learned about emotional fluency? Like, is there something that still blows your mind, even after researching this for so long?
The most surprising thing is that emotional fluency doesn't just make you better at language, it makes you better at being human. When you connect words to emotions, you're not just learning a language. You're learning how to feel in a new way. You're learning how to express joy, sadness, anger, and love in a language that isn't your first. And that changes you. It makes you more empathetic, more open, more alive. I've talked to learners who say that emotional fluency didn't just help them speak a new language, it helped them understand themselves better. And that's the real power of this method. It's not just about fluency. It's about connection.
Wow. That's really beautiful. And it makes me want to go out and try this right now. But before we go, I have to ask, what's next for this series? Like, where are we going from here? Because I feel like we've just scratched the surface of this rabbit hole.
Next week, we're diving into the dark side of emotional fluency. We're going to talk about language trauma, how negative experiences can block fluency, and how to rewire your brain to overcome them. We'll hear from learners who froze up in conversations because of a single bad memory, and we'll explore the science of how to unlearn fear. It's going to be intense, but it's also going to be life-changing. And if you're someone who's never felt stuck in your language journey, this is the episode for you. So hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and get ready to go deeper than ever before.
That sounds amazing. And if you're listening to this and you're as excited as I am, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss it. And if you've ever had an emotional experience with language, good or bad, we want to hear about it. Drop a comment below and tell us your story. Because the more we share, the more we learn. Right, Alex?
Absolutely. And remember, language isn't just about words. It's about feelings. So the next time you're struggling to remember a word, ask yourself, what does this remind me of? Because the answer might just be the key to unlocking fluency. Thanks for joining us on this journey. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone. And happy learning.
Until next time, keep feeling, keep learning, and keep connecting.